This is Cannaramic, and we're bringing you cannabis like you've never seen it before. Today we are talking with Dr. Monica Tang, who is a doctor of pharmacy, and she is involved in something called pharmacokinetics, which we're going to learn about. She is a graduate of Northeastern University and a doctor of pharmacy studies, and she did a special endocannabinoid receptor research co-op, which you'll tell us a little bit about that, because you're going to tell us about the endocannabinoid system. And you also are on the board of directors with Doctors for Cannabis, for cannabis regulation, Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. So we know that that's a very important organization. We're so happy that doctors are actually on our side here with regard to regulation. Thank you for being here, Dr. Tang.
Thank you so much for having me. This is truly an honor to be able to provide some insight and education on the basic science, current state of research, and how science should drive policy in the imminent legalization of cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, the science is all that matters, right? Because you can tell everybody, you know, your thoughts, and I can share my opinions about the myths and about the ideas, but people want to know the hardcore science, and I feel like that's the way we're going to reach everyday people for cannabis and help to change the minds and take the stigmas away. So just to give us some context, you actually, on a day-to-day basis, you're out there educating people about cannabis, and you're educating doctors, and you're also consulting doctors as they consult their patients, right?
Yes. So a little bit about myself. I am a board member of Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. DFCR is a nonprofit advocacy group, and we are a group of physicians, and I'm a pharmacist, a registered pharmacist with the New Jersey Board of Pharmacy, and we educate the community, as in policymakers, lawmakers, the general public, other healthcare providers, on the fact-based science around cannabis, research, and the pros and cons of research that's currently available, research that's coming down the pipeline from international sources, and we use our fact-based educational platform to help make decisions about cannabis legalization. I'm also involved with Minorities for Medical Marijuana as the Director of Research and Clinical Education. In my day-to-day job, I'm a medical science liaison for the multi-state, multinational cannabis consultant compliance. Forefront Ventures is the company that I work for, and I also consult for other entities, medical schools, pharmacy schools, hospital systems, any clinical setting that needs the education around cannabis, cannabinoids, the endocannabinoid system. I work with providing them fact-based education.
Well, you know what that all says to me, and it should say to everyone else, is Dr. Monica Tang is someone whose word you can trust, because she's obviously got the information, and we're going to get all the information from you right now, and you're going to elucidate so much for us. So what is pharmacokinetics? And I'm so excited because I actually can pronounce that word, pharmacokinetics, and why is it important to understanding how people use cannabis?
Great question. So pharmacokinetics, very simply defined, is what the drug as in like any chemical compound, and how it's introduced into the body, what the body does to that drug, how it processes it. So how the body absorbs, distributes, metabolizes, and eliminates any drug, any, again, chemical entity introduced into the body system. It's accepting it, processing it, and then eventually removing it. But there's also another term that's related to pharmacokinetics, and that's pharmacodynamics. With pharmacodynamics, it's what the drug does to the body. So not only is your body experiencing effects from a drug, but it's also processing it in a different way. So that's why there's different responses for different individuals when they're taking in drugs. Some people will have a positive effect, some people will have a negative effect. It's dose dependent based on the drug, so that's the pharmacodynamics, but then also depending on that person, the individual, their rate of metabolism, their age, their gender, their racial background, all these factors contribute to how well that person can tolerate or not tolerate a drug. So there's an individualizable window for how well a drug acts in the body, and it's individualizable to every person.
Wow. Okay. So when I take, for instance, a Tylenol, right? Because this is also the same thing. The way that my body processes a Tylenol is how it goes to my liver, how long it takes for my liver to break it down, its digestion, all of that, and then how the Tylenol actually affects me. That's the pharmacodynamics of it. That's the effect that I receive as a result of taking the Tylenol. Okay, so I'm learning. I'm about to have a degree in pharmacy as well, just from this conversation. Okay, know that. So let me ask you, what is our endocannabinoid system and how does it operate when we use cannabis?
The endocannabinoid receptor system is a very intricate messenger system in our body. So, over millions of years, humans and certain mammals have evolved to have these secondary messenger receptors. They're G protein coupled receptors, and GPCRs are very fancy words for specialized receptors that are not only unique to how the body can process and accept cannabis and cannabinoids, but we have an internal messaging system that balances homeostasis. So homeostasis is our body's natural balancing mechanism. It's for the body and the brain. It's how we function daily. It's how our brain will balance the ability to eat, sleep, relax, forget, and protect with cellular responses in your immune system, mounting a response to a foreign substance in your body. So that's how you get immune reactions from your body. So homeostasis is maintained by the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system consists of not only specialized receptors, the CB1, CB2 receptors. CB1 receptors are ubiquitous in the body. They're everywhere. They're in the brain, they're in all your organs, and they are, again, balancing your body's internal mechanism and messaging systems. And then the CB2 receptors are located in your immune system or the periphery. So in your immune system, that's your tonsils, your spleens, immune cells, B cells, T cells, and that's so important because that's for maintaining your body's health. And not only are there receptors, but there's also endogenous cannabinoids. These endogenous cannabinoids are created by your body naturally, automatically. And there's so many of them, but the two that we focus on mainly because there's the most research, there's decades of research around this. There's the most science and research around 2-arachidonoglycerol, or 2-AG, and anandamide, which is AEA. So anandamide is really interesting in that its root word is actually from Sanskrit, and Sanskrit means bliss. So anandamide, when it acts in the body, when it acts at the CB1 receptors in the brain, when the CB1 receptors are heavily concentrated there, that's how you can get euphoria. You can get a state of bliss. It's uplifting, and it helps, again, with how your brain is processing stress and how it processes pain, how it processes anxiety. And that is, again, your body trying to just regulate how you function regularly.
Mm-hmm. So just now, before we talked, I had a nice chunk of dark chocolate, and it's like that high 85% or more. Now, I know that anandamide is what my body gives me euphoria. So when I had that chocolate, the pharmacodynamics of that was that it activated anandamide possibly, and so that I got a little high from the chocolate. Is that what happened?
Well, I think we have to also unpack the physiology of the reward pleasure pathway. So that's in the brain, and when you enjoy a stimulus, so chocolate is enjoyable unto itself. There's also lots of sugar when you're having chocolate. That's going to stimulate the part of your body as you're like digesting it and introducing sugar into your body, into the brain, that stimulates that reward pathway. So yes, secondarily, you could have been arguably stimulating anandamide through the endocannabinoid system. It does affect pleasure centers in the same way, but the best part about all this in this conversation is that there's a lot of intricate, complicated science around it. To say one, like black and white, like so directly affects each other, is there's a whole symphony of messenger systems in your body, other receptors beyond the endocannabinoid system. There's acetylcholine, dopamine, there are so many neurotransmitters that work in concert in your body with the endocannabinoid system. So they all affect each other. They're all overlapping and intimately intertwined.
I tell you, this body stuff, is so exciting. You have a ton of things. I guess there's never enough work to do here, because it seems as if the more you know, the more it continues to evolve, and the more you need to know. So we're just going to focus on the peripheral levels. We'll leave the deeper stuff to you, and we're just going to get into some basic stuff. Now, we know that there are different delivery methods to partake in cannabis, and so what are those different delivery methods, and how do these methods differ in terms of how soon we experience the effects of cannabis and how well it processes it, etc.?
So there are different routes of administration. There's oral administration, where you take something by mouth. There's inhalation, where you can introduce cannabis and cannabinoids into the body by smoking them and or vaporizing them. The difference between smoking and vaporizing as methods of inhalation are that smoking involves burning the product, the cannabis cannabinoid product, to combustion. And with vaporizing, it's heating it through a conduction convection heating mechanism, whether it's a vape pen, whether it is a volcano desktop vaporizer. There are different ways to inhale the cannabinoids as a vapor, so not burning it directly, but heating it so that you can extract it, and then they're inhalable products. There's also topical administration. Topical administration is applying it locally, directly to the skin. So that's for more convenient means of avoiding it being directly introduced into your body, so it doesn't go through the oral administration, it doesn't go through inhalation, it's not going to go through your liver to be activated. With topical, you can use creams, lotions, ointments, patches possibly. And then there's also other alternative routes of administration, such as rectal administration, vaginal administration with suppositories. There's even, going back to oral administration, there's oral mucosal administration with buccal, or with your cheek. There's a way that it can be absorbed that way through the lining there in your mouth and like not swallowed directly. But then there's also sublingual, where you can administer a tincture and oil under the tongue. So different delivery methods, like you had just said, do have different onsets of action versus different durations of action. So something that is quick and effective is inhalation, for sure. It goes quickly. It can be introduced into the lungs, it's rapidly metabolized, so you can feel effects in seconds to minutes. Rapid absorption also happens with the sublingual, under the tongue, or cheek, right? When people use lozenges, or if they were to use a sublingual tincture or oil. But then the ones that take longer are oral administrations with a tablet, a capsule, an edible, because that's going through your digestive tract. It'll take 30 to 90 minutes. It really depends on the person and the potency of the product for it to go through your stomach, to be introduced to your liver, for the metabolites in that edible product that your body is breaking down to convert into another metabolite, 11-hydroxy-THC, which is actually 4 times more potent and acts in the body 4 times longer than the conventional delta-9 THC metabolite. So there's a wait time with oral administration, whether that's an edible, whether that's the tablet or the capsule that's infused with cannabis. And in that wait time, people think that they might need more. They don't feel the effects as quickly as they would with inhalation. So they might unintentionally administer more. I always caution with any route of administration, any delivery method, regardless of its inhalation, regardless of if it's oral, each patient, because they don't know how they're going to respond to that particular product based on its potency, they should do the start low, go slow method with dosing. They should dose with a conservative amount that they know that they can reasonably process. If they're new to cannabis entirely, I think that they should start with like the lowest possible percentage of THC, because THC is the active metabolite or active mind-altering cannabinoid, and THC has different potencies depending on the product that it's in. And with those, I always summarize start low, go slow, because it depends not only on the person, but the potency of the product and then the delivery method that
Right. So when I choose a inhalation method, whether that be smoking or a vape pen, is one cleaner than the other? Like, because it's smoking, you're burning to combustion, but vaping, it's not to combustion. So is it maybe understood to be a little bit cleaning to do vaping versus smoking?
Generally, yes. So generally, yes, but also no. There's pros and cons to each. So let's unpack that for a second. When we're talking about smoking, you're definitely right in that you're introducing tar, carcinogens, carbon monoxide, and other harmful chemicals into the body. So smoking is never really recommended. The one, or not one, but a couple of reasons that patients particularly would want smoking is that it's more convenient and easier, and it's also more cost effective if they can't afford the very expensive vaporizing pens or vaporizers that are available on the market. So that is an issue for cost. But also, when you do use inhalation, vaporizing is technically preferred. However, there's also safety issues around that. So with vaporizing, if you were to use a vaporizer that directly heats with conduction and convection heating for the cannabis into that vape pen, then yes, you can inhale the vapors. So you're avoiding all those chemicals, the tar, the carcinogens, and you don't have that issue. But then also when you're using vaporizable products, you need to be making sure that you read the label to see what other ingredients are included so that you don't have an allergic reaction, so that there's something that could be harmful that's an inactive ingredient that's part of the product that could be introduced into your body, because it's difficult to say that one is the safest way without any possible harms. One method, vaporizing, is preferred in the medical cannabis field technically over, or medical cannabis specialty. It's an emerging field of healthcare. Practitioners, when they're counseling patients, they usually recommend, if they want to use inhalation, to use vaporizing over smoking, but then the takeaway message is that vaporizing also has its own potential harms.
If you're using one of the products that come with like a solution or something like that, you have to be concerned about what's in the solution. Let me ask you, when you vaporize, do you also smell the aroma like you do when you smoke it? Because a lot of people want to avoid having that smell, right? They want to be discreet. So when you vaporize, do you have that aroma?
You can still detect trace sense of cannabis burning. It has a very unique smell, but it's not that pungent, very potent burning smell. It's not as powerfully obvious, I guess, or as apparent when it's being burned directly for smoking. Because again, that's the combustion, and it's also the other byproducts that are being burned, whether it's like a rolling paper and that has its own scent. Vaporizing reduces the smell significantly. Some people even report anecdotally that it eliminates the smell altogether, but I think that the most important part of inhalation, whether it's vaporizing or smoking, is that the takeaway should be you should be in a safe space wherever you are. Be aware that it is still a Schedule 1 drug, so if you were to be in a public space, you have to be aware that federally it's still illegal. So as the patient, you want to be aware that this could impact your consumption. And also when you're in the public, you don't want to draw unwanted attention to yourself. You want to use this in a safe space. But I will say, depending on the state that you're in, there are protections extended to registered patients of medical marijuana programs where they can consume, whether vaporizing or smoking, in public areas that allow the consumption, smoking of tobacco. So that could be whether it's like certain college campuses, it could be the designated smoking areas of hospitals, airports. So if you can smoke tobacco or nicotine there, you can also smoke cannabis. The main takeaway, though, is that you still have to be aware that federal law could trump state law, and also it's circumstantial. It is a very tricky situation for patients to navigate this right now, which is why there's like a huge push in the healthcare field for the supporters of medical cannabis, because all this legal red tape that hinders patients from being able to administer when they need this, if they genuinely qualify with a medical cannabis condition, they have persistent symptoms that they need to address around the clock, these areas and barriers to access make it difficult for them. So I always tell patients to just be careful. I tell patients to be aware of their rights and to always have their medical card on them, and to make sure that they're being as discreet as possible. There's also, with the conversation we're having about the different onset of action and different duration of action, if they're having a persistent symptom, chronic pain, muscle spasms, digestive issues, if that's something that affects them for the majority of the day, they could benefit from an adequately dosed edible, because that would be much longer.
That's also discreet, so they don't have to worry about people noticing that they're having it. There's so many places to go with this, and I don't want to stick too long on it because there's so many more things to talk about. But I wanted to ask you really quickly in terms of onset. I've heard about these new tinctures that are internal in the cheek, or they're nano. They're sort of like water soluble nano kind of molecules of CBD. And I'm wondering, are those also high, quick onset because it's like the nanoparticles, or is that just some kind of marketing thing?
Yeah, there's not a lot of data around the actual efficacy, onset, dosing, consistency around these products. I think they're new to market. I think that while they're innovating on technology, we still need to research it, because again, the technology of the product for a delivery method is already variable, and it's new and innovative, so we don't have a lot of a framework to apply from it, from pre-existing data. And then we still have to bear in mind that individuals will respond differently to it. So
right
across the board, the same case for every single individual.
Yeah, there's a lot that needs to be done in this space. I mean, just thinking about people, the lawsuit that is at the federal level right now, where I think a young lady, her name is Alexis, I can't remember her last name, she's suing the federal government because she's a medical marijuana patient, but she can't travel with her medical marijuana without risking being arrested, because it's on a federal level. If she goes into an airport, she's going to be potentially arrested if she gets caught with it, because federally it's still illegal, whereas in her state or in individual states it is legal. So crossing state barriers. I heard about somebody, I don't know if this is a rumor, I haven't checked officially. There was a woman in Disney World that was held up for having CBD. Because, again, all of these kind of gray areas, it's really creating issues for the patients. And I thank you for your work and your advocacy, because that's what we need to have done so that we can get consistency across the board. Now, let's get into some of these myths, because we need to dispel, destigmatize, and just clarify for people. What's the realness? Because a lot of folks want to partake in medical marijuana, or they just don't believe in it. I know a lady in my church who just was like, no, I don't mess with that. And I'm like, you can get real relief. And she's rather take her opiates and everything else. So we want people to have options, right? So let's go over some of these beliefs. So one is that cannabis has no medicinal benefit. It's just an excuse for people who want to get high.
Okay. So I do want to address that this has a lot of stereotyping and stigma around it, and shaming people for wanting to use a botanically based plant that could have therapeutic benefits and has thousands of years of anecdotal data across centuries, countries, civilizations, continents. There's something to that with the history behind medicinal cannabis use. So while we can't rely on anecdotal data to be the data that we need, that we would get from randomized controlled trials for safety, efficacy, and ease of use, we still have this framework that we need to tie in this narrative with history, that with the medicinal use from ancient civilizations, they weren't necessarily using cannabis to get high, to experience that euphoria. They were using it for digestive disorders. They were using it for psychological reasons, whether it was anxiety, whether it was for insomnia, whether it was for a lot of other different issues. People turn to cannabis, and we need to define and differentiate adult use, which could be recreational, which could be ritualistic, which could be for non-medical reasons, could be a reason, people do want to feel that intoxicating euphoria, that mind-altering high. But then with medical, there's a lot of other benefits, other phytochemicals or groups or of different chemical compounds in the plant that are terpenes, and also in nature they're ubiquitous as organic essential oils, and then there's also flavonoids, which are for the pigment of different plants. There's different components to cannabis. So the terpenes, flavonoids, they're not euphoric. They don't give you the high, but they work together with cannabinoids, with delta-9 THC, or hydrocannabinol, which is the one mind-altering, intoxicating inducing. I say intoxicating, like quote unquote, because I think that word we need to kind of step away from. It's good for the masses to explain what THC is, but intoxicating also has that stigma around it where it's like alcohol. But I think we need to also outline the differences of how, for medicinal reasons, you don't need to use a lot of THC unless it's medically necessary for that patient. If the patient has chronic pain due to cancer, if they have persistent nausea and vomiting that hasn't responded to lower doses of THC and they need to go up slowly, increase it, if they have muscle spasms, digestive disorders that have not responded to conventional therapy, they might need a higher dose. If they've been using cannabis for a longer time, their body has developed tolerance. But there are some things to say for the fact that there's been thousands of years of people turning to medical cannabis, not wanting to get high. If they do, that's again a different conversation, because adult use and medical are totally different.
Right.
There are purported medicinal benefits. We need to study it more. Like, we could also find out more data to substantiate the potential drawbacks, the harms and risks of inappropriate doses of medicinal cannabis for patients, because again, with an individualizable window for how people respond, the same dose isn't going to work for everyone. It's not going to work for the same condition. It's not going to work for the same symptoms. And there's so many different factors that we just discussed that will affect how that person responds adequately to cannabis.
Right. But ultimately, you know, it's not just a way for people to get high, which is the stigma. I love that you've pointed out, you know, people don't even consider the ritualistic aspects of it, or, you know, the fact that, you know, adult use is different from recreational. People who are adults, you're not necessarily having recreation when you come home from work and you want a way to kind of like bring yourself into a more calmer state. That's not recreational, but it is adult use. And I guess it doesn't necessarily fall under the medicinal parameters, but those are ways that people are using it. It is interesting that over the years, the plant has, you know, THC has dominated the conversation in terms of the effect that THC, the high that it provides, has really dominated and dictated how people see the plant when it's, you know, all of these other things, the terpenes, the flavonoids, you know, the cannabinoids that also play a strong role in the medicine. So let's get to the next thing. Smoking marijuana makes people lazy and unproductive.
It's again along the same lines of stigmatizing this. So if a person has a high THC strain that they're going to smoke, they could feel this effect where they get the body high or couch lock. So anecdotally, in cannabis consumption culture, people attribute that, again, anecdotally, to indicas. Indicas are a subspecies of cannabis. There's also sativa, there's hybrids. But I think we need to also address that we need to step away from that in a way, that there aren't many true indicas available today. There's been years and years of cross cultivation, cross breeding of strains to get different genetics. And then also there's been so many advances in agricultural technology so that you can produce varying potencies of strains. But again, because they've been crossbred, a true indica versus a true sativa is something that is good to educate someone who's never ever experienced or encountered any education around cannabis. It's a good jumping point to just define and differentiate. Indicas have different growth patterns, or from different parts of the country from a sativa. But people will say smoking an indica gives me couch lock and then I feel lazy. So that could be true, but it would be, again, due to higher amounts of THC. And then there's also a terpene in cannabis called myrcene. Myrcene's also And while terpenes are ubiquitous in nature, myrcene is also found in mangoes. So more concentrations of myrcene could also contribute to how long THC is acting in the body and giving you that sedating, calming, relaxing feeling, the body effect, and the head high. Those will contribute to the state of relaxation people feel. So potency is important. The amount you consume is important.
Right. And I love that you're calling it a state of relaxation instead of people saying you're lazy and unproductive. Again, it's all about the language that's been used about it around this plan. It's all negative. The same way you can call something lazy, someone lazy and unproductive, you can call them relaxed and, you know, calm and stress-free, and, you know, and not high strung. So I just think, again, those negative words, you're saying basically, you know, the indica strains typically provide a more relaxing type of feeling afterwards. And if you're having a high indica strain, THC, that more than likely you will feel sedated. But, you know, that's just because of the plant. It's not the type of person that you are, and it's not going to make you an unproductive person if you don't, you know, that's not what you're looking for. So let's talk about the next myth. Smoking marijuana kills brain cells.
Okay, so this one is so interesting. They're all very interesting topics to address. So with smoking marijuana specifically, smoking cannabis, and that killing brain cells, we're talking about how there's different cannabinoids. The THC, because people want to vilify it in so many ways, as it, with its mind-altering effects, they want to vilify it in this way. But CBD, cannabidiol, is a non-euphoric, multimodal, mechanistically cannabinoid that is similar to THC, but the main difference is that it acts in so many different ways to provide a lot of symptom relief, and it doesn't cause the high. So CBD is actually being evaluated in clinical trials in animal models and humans to be neuroprotective. Neuroprotective means it would actually protect the integrity of brain cells or neurons, but we still need more data. We still need more research. Something interesting to bear in mind. There is emerging data, and we just need more evidence so that we can, again, educate more on this. But CBD, while that is purported or being studied to be neuroprotective, THC and the smoking marijuana kills brain cells. The concern is that smoking isn't the best way to consume for medicinal reasons. Again, for adult use, any person's preference will factor into how they consume cannabis. But smoking isn't the best because if you are smoking, you could be using tobacco, nicotine with cannabis at the same time. And we know that tobacco, nicotine, other harmful chemicals that are smoked will cause brain damage. So that's something that should be really emphasized in education because it is a public health concern. Smoking isn't the safest vehicle. Will it kill brain cells? We need to be careful that we tell younger groups, younger audiences, that with youth use, smoking cannabis in general is going to affect their neurocognitive development and the way that their brain will develop normally if it wasn't affected by a drug. But then again, this goes back to how we're vilifying it, but also we need to educate youth that they shouldn't be using any drugs inappropriately, and doses and smoking are just not safe in general. Higher doses of drugs is what I mean. And it's interesting because there's no real straightforward answer, and then we need to be aware with the public health concern around it. So to say that it kills brain cells outright, but then also to say like CBD is neuroprotective, we have a long way to go with this.
Well, you know, the whole idea I think came from people who, you know, again, the stereotypical stoner appears to be dull and dim-witted. So it's sort of like, oh, you're dull, the smoking, you know, killed your brain cells. And again, none of this is rooted in any science. It's just one of those kind of like bundle it all together and come up with every, you know, stereotypical thing that could be said about cannabis. In terms of youth usage, we're going to have another talk with Sasha Simon from the Drug Policy Alliance. She's got a great program called, it's a harm reduction program, Safety First. And it's for high school students to learn and be educated about cannabis usage, about drug usage. It's not a just say no type of program where abstinence is pushed. It's more of, we understand that in spite of us saying no, people are going to use So how do we teach them so that they can use it and understand what they're doing and make better choices? So look out for that talk from Sasha Simon of the Drug Policy Alliance. I want to get to my next question. People say cannabis is as bad for your lungs as cigarettes. So I don't know. What do you say?
So we did cover this briefly. Similarly, it depends on what the cannabis is being smoked with at the same time. If it's smoked onto itself, again, that method of smoking alone, it does irritate your lungs, it irritates your throat, it could increase the amount of phlegm that your body produces and discomfort and cough, and all this irritation comes along with smoking. That's just the way it is with smoking. And then smoking cannabis with tobacco or nicotine will definitely be far more harmful to your lungs. And the data that we actually have around cannabis unto itself causing lung cancer, there's limited data currently. There's always that issue of the limited data with the federal status really hindering research. It's a huge public health disservice to the general masses of people all consuming cannabis. You just need to be careful how often you smoke, how much you smoke. Again, the potency of the THC in the products that you're smoking cannabis, they will all contribute to increasing risk factors for cancer, for lung disease, for other unintended harmful consequences. So I always caution people to be careful. I always tell them to truly evaluate for medical reasons, the reasons that they were using cannabis, and then how there are safer alternative means, different ways to introduce cannabis into the body with different onset effects and then different durations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So yeah, you brought up a point about how the research has been hindered because of the Schedule I status of the drug, meaning the drug is assigned a status that is on the same level as heroin and MDMA. And because of that, clinicians, scientists cannot get access to the drug in such a way that they have been able to do a lot of robust studies. And that's the reason why you keep saying there needs to be more studies. But thankfully, we're going to have two researchers on Cannaramic. And I don't mean to use this as a cross promotion, but you're bringing up all of these great mentions. A researcher doing work on autism in cannabis and another one doing work on brain disorders in cannabis. So look out for those. Now, the next one is cannabis can kill you. People are dying on the street because they're smoking marijuana. What do you have to say about that?
So again, these answers are all so complicated. There's no straightforward answer, but I think that is important in the conversation, giving the pros and cons, being objective and impartial with the feedback and the education that we're providing, because we can't say it's perfectly harmless, go ahead, go forth, and you don't need to know everything that we're discussing today, but you also need to be aware of the potential harms that could happen. So with this, due to botanical cannabis, has an overdose death ever been documented in history? No. The lethal dose of cannabis when inhaled via smoking, it would have to be a ratio of about 1,500 pounds of cannabis smoked in minutes to introduce a lethal dose into your body that would induce death. So can people die due to botanical cannabis smoking? Well, if you're getting cannabis from a suspicious source, an illicit market where you don't know how it was processed, when it was processed, when it was packaged, if that herbal cannabis product is contaminated with toxins, with fentanyl, another drug that does unto itself induce cardiorespiratory depression, or it can induce sudden death because you just can't breathe anymore, you can overdose on fentanyl. You can overdose on fentanyl that has been laced into the cannabis, which is a huge concern. But then also if there's mold, mildew, other chemicals that are not supposed to be there, then that can induce death due to cannabis. So that's a concern. But then also when people say cannabis kills, like cannabis sourced from these illegal sources, these unregulated markets, people are also associating and affiliating medical cannabis, not even just medical cannabis, botanical cannabis, with synthetic cannabinoids. Synthetic cannabinoids are different from phytocannabinoids. Phytocannabinoids are plant-based. That's the THC, the CBD. There's hundreds of them. The synthetic cannabinoids are different in that K2, spice, those are the names that are affiliated with these synthetic cannabinoids. They're totally different from THC. They're totally different from CBD. And structurally, chemically, going back to our first question about the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of how the synthetic cannabinoids act in the body, they are harmful. They can induce death. People should be very cautious of purchasing products because if it's, again, it's the unregulated market that they're turning to, they need to know that K2 spice is not the same as cannabis that's botanical, that's naturally grown, that's the organic plant source. Those are different in how they're going to affect the body, and there are a lot of dangers that come with consuming K2 and spice.
Okay, so summarization, you would have to have over 1,000, I think, kilograms, you said, of cannabis in like within seconds in order to overdose on it. So that's a highly unlikely situation if you're talking about botanical, fresh grown, unadulterated cannabis. But there are risks if people are buying things on the black market for cannabis laced with all types of different things. And those things people need to be very beware of. Now, the next one is about the addictive nature. Pot is addictive. And I wanted to kind of get into that because that's a little bit of a segue from what we just talked about. So what are your thoughts when people say pot is addictive?
Well, like any drug, there is the addiction potential. Before I do dive into this topic, because it is important to cover the addiction risk with cannabis, I do want to say that with the lethal dose question that we just talked about, it's actually smoking hundreds to like 1,500 pounds of cannabis.
Pounds.
In a minute. Yeah.
Okay.
That's, again, like a calculation based off of like animal models. No one's been ever able to induce that directly. It's a calculation. But again, so how this ties into addiction is that addiction is, and people do forget this often, even in healthcare. So I'm always gently reminding other doctors, other nurses, even other pharmacists, other clinicians that this is a genetic disorder. This is a chronic condition, addiction, that needs to be addressed with so many different models of therapy that we know work. So beyond just having cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, which is just like really effective counseling, there's so many different ways that addiction needs to be treated. But with the cannabis risk of addiction, it's quite low in that it's approximately 10% of people, 1 in 10, could potentially become addicted. And then that is based on product-specific factors and then patient or person-specific factors. So that's why I bring up that it's a disorder. So if a person has predisposing risk factors to trigger an addiction, the likelihood of that person becoming addicted to cannabis increases. Whereas the 1 in 10 estimate that we have right now, I also want to point out that that's from evaluating adult use for quote unquote recreational individuals. These people aren't using cannabis for medicinal purposes. So when people say there's data out there that's somewhat cherry picked when people say like using cannabis could lead to, it's been shown to lead to like a 4 times higher increase of leading directly to heroin and opioid use. Again, we need to unpack that. What predisposing risk factors did that individual have? Was there previous history of abuse, trauma, other chronic psychiatric comorbid conditions, depression, anxiety, PTSD, that would increase the likelihood of addiction for that person? Because then, yes, it's not appropriate to be using cannabis because you could potentially become addicted to it. With its addiction liability, there's actually something that's called, there's a theory out there that's called the common liability to addiction model. So this ties into what I've been discussing about how, yes, cannabis is potentially addictive, but to a lesser degree than nicotine, tobacco, opioids, other harmful drugs, heroin, and even to a lesser degree such as things that are introduced into everyday diet and nutrition, such as like sugar and salt, which they are other different types of chemicals being introduced into the body, and you are exposed to that. Like caffeine is one of them as well. So with the common liability to addiction theory, there's a lot of predisposing risk factors that could trigger someone's risk for being addicted to a drug, any of the ones that I just mentioned, because it's going to be their level of education, their level of access to healthcare and proper care and allied services around that, that would contribute to that person's overall health, their mental state, their physical stability. And then if they have, again, risks for being addictive, they're predisposed with an increased likelihood to become more addicted. They could become addicted to cannabis, to tobacco, to nicotine, to opioids, all these other really addictive, highly addictive, more addictive than cannabis, these drugs,
right,
equally. Right. So it's a public health concern.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting because I think I would sum it up. Well, I'm going to sum it up the way Redman, who is also another speaker on the summit, said it, without the eloquence of your statement. He pretty much said, I've never met anyone who has become addicted to cannabis. And if they were addicted to cannabis, it's because they were already predisposed to being that way, that they had something in them, that they were going to be addicted to something. They had a very high propensity to be addicted to something. I think that's pretty much, the summarization. So check out Redman to hear his perspective. Now I want to get into last two ones, because there's so much here and I can have you here all day, but these are good ones that people want to know. They want to know if marijuana is a gateway drug.
Okay, so that's similar to what we just talked about with the addictive potential. So there has been enough data to debunk the gateway theory. So to explain to those who don't know, gateway theory is the premise that once you smoke or use cannabis in any way, you get addicted to cannabis, that is the gateway drug to addiction and the increased need, the drive to abuse and use other drugs that are more addictive and harmful. So the gateway theory has been debunked. What is emerging more is the common liability to addiction theory that I just outlined. And with that, what ties into this is that the potency of the product of THC, I know I repeat this, but it's important to hear often, and as many times in all the questions that are being answered, because it's important. The higher the potency of THC, the rate of how often it's being used, and if it's like chronic long-term use, that could lead to how someone becomes addicted. If anything, there is emerging data that cannabis isn't a gateway drug. It's actually an exit drug. It's an exit drug from addiction. It's being evaluated in that CBD has the therapeutic potential. So there needs to be more research around this, that it could actually help patients with addiction. And it could help them in the treatment of opioid use disorder, potentially, but it needs to be evaluated more, because at face level, evolutionarily, cannabidiol, CBD, being, again, non-euphoric, and has all these different benefits: anti-nausea, anti-vomiting, anti-pain, muscle spasms. It could potentially help with seizure frequency, severity, duration. All these amazing, wonderful claims have been associated with CBD. We need to study it more to get the true data around all these profiles. But CBD also could potentially help with weaning people off of their addiction to opioids with other substances that they're currently abusing, and that it's part of the plant. It's part of cannabis, and that CBD and THC, when they're combined together, CBD mechanistically offsets the negative effects that you experience when there's too much THC. So it definitely needs to be studied more, but we also need to be careful about claiming that it's this wonderful, amazing product that could help, because that's not going to be the case for everyone.
Right.
With individuals, I always say, if you think that there's any risk, any concern, get screened by a healthcare provider. Ask your doctor about your personal history, have a conversation about, again, things that could lead to addiction, because those are risk factors that can be identified with the proper screening and monitoring, but then also talking to your healthcare provider about the appropriateness of using it.
Right. I love that you touch on the idea of it being an exit drug. Ryan Vandenbush, another speaker on the Cannaramic Summit, is a former NHL professional hockey player. He talks about, in his talk, about being addicted to opioids and how he was able to overcome the opioid addiction and reverse it by using cannabis. And actually that's discussed by a lot of athletes. And I know that there is a lot of research out there right now on the possibility of using cannabis as a exit for opioids. Actually, Dr. Donner from the, who's a medical marijuana doctor, also talks about this in his talk. We've got so much, I mean, I could keep you here all day because people have so many myths and stigmas and ideas. And I'm just glad we've just tipped the iceberg. We know that there's going to be a lot of research coming because thankfully people are getting access, scientists are getting access to the drug, and there's more interest in doing research. And your organization, Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, is also pushing research and pushing this type of inquiry. So prayerfully in the next few months, years, we will know more. In the meantime, we appreciate all you're doing to educate our communities, our doctors, our physicians, our regular lay people on the truths and setting aside the myths so that we can get the information and get the care we're needing. So thank you so much, Dr. Monica Tang.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a great conversation.
Excellent, excellent. And we're looking forward. We're going to continue this some more because people, I'm sure, are going to have some more questions. We'll try to get those in. So thank you for everything. And I know you've given us cannabis in a way we've never seen it before. Thank you.